All right, we're at 12. Thank you guys all for joining. As people kind of start coming in here from their last meetings, I'm David Kiston. So I am the Mid-Continent coordinator, and I have been involved with FLC for a few years now. It's an honor today to introduce our speaker, Mark Skinner. So Mark's the Vice President of SSTI. A lot of you will know him from their annual conference or from the SSTI Weekly Digest, which is my go-to for the latest and greatest in technology-based economic development. Mark's joining today to talk about state support for innovation, which is a confusing but critical issue for a lot of us these days. And with that, Mark, I'll hand it over to you. Feel free, everyone, to put questions in the chat throughout. And yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you, Mark, for joining.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Thanks for putting up with me here for 20 minutes or so. And we will try to keep my comments short. I've only prepared a few slides to try to make sure that's the case. And you're exactly right on, it's a confusing time, hard to keep track of things. And as I was thinking about what I might say today, as we come out of this phase of the pandemic, at least, I thought I'd start with, well, I started with a rather pessimistic outlook because the last couple years, at least until, yeah, thank you, Adam. Thinking about what states have been doing the last couple years as far as strategy and innovation, obviously a lot of it's been on hold because there were other more pressing short-term concerns. But I will say I've been in the field now, oh my gosh, 37 years, and states were the leaders of a lot of innovation policy within the regions and the states. They did strategic plans, they made big investments, and that seemed to end for a while. So I thought the idea that there was a lack of long-term thinking, or that we needed to think about long-term thinking and trying a few things is something they should be focused on. But I also thought, because it's confusing, that it would be useful for me, probably for Dave, for all of us, if folks don't mind sharing your thoughts early in the chat of what's going on in your own state, your state leadership. Are they thinking about innovation? And you'll see some typos here. Are they thinking long-term strategy, or are they dealing with the emergence of or coming out of the pandemic? Are they still working off a strategic plan? Do they have one, or a vision? Do they have quantified goals around innovation? Or are they more focused, and this is not meant to be a partisan conversation at all, you will hear me trash pretty much anybody. That's one joy of turning 60. You get to trash everybody else and think you're right. Or are they really focused more on just shrinking the government's role in innovation in corporate, or individual and corporate lives? And how does that affect the innovation policy within your states? So I think we agreed I wouldn't look at the chats, and we'll let Dave collect some thoughts there. And feel free to contribute, add, have a conversation amongst yourself on what other people are posting there. Adam, we can go ahead to the next slide while people are thinking about that. So the last year or so, well, no, the last couple of years, states have really been reactive rather than proactive. The pandemic was part of that, but everything that's happened in the last year as far as federal funding and the magnitude of the funding has really put strategy and coordination on a back burner in many respects. So I just listed a bunch of the different programs and agencies, and I'll use, using EDA, Economic Development Administration, as an example. That's a $300 million agency. They have gotten over $4 billion to manage in the last year and a half with the same staff. So it's it's a tad chaotic. And they were structured around a certain constituency, right? The distressed communities. So how do you pull all of the thinking forward, innovation-oriented activities into that kind of existing structure with that much money? So you end up with a lot of really cool programs coming out, Build Back Better. And if we had, and Dave and I were talking earlier, if you had $100 million, what would you do different in your region? Again, states are being asked to cough up some money, but that is not a state-directed strategy, right? The regions are coming in for that. They're competing against each other, the metro areas. And so that creates some challenges for the states. We've also seen a real resurgence in what we call smokestack chasing. You know, you've got your big ticket investments that a lot of large corporations are making: chips, electric vehicles, batteries, Amazon. And that has directed a lot of more traditional or conventional economic development strategies, recruitment, inducement funds, and less around the innovation space. At the same time, those decisions, site selections, are being made around the capacity of the region to provide the workforce they need, the skilled workforce. And part of the inducements, the Intel one that President Biden talked about last night in the State of the Union, this is huge for Central Ohio, where I am. $20 billion, the biggest chip plant supposedly in the world. Once it's done, over 10 years, we've got to have a workforce that can handle that. And so a lot of the innovation policy will be directed toward those kind of activities, not necessarily as much, I fear, in the entrepreneurship and commercialization space as a result. A lot of places are also captive of FIRE, which is fintech, insurance, and real estate. Following on that, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of activity in the place-based, and the EDA funds are encouraging this or directed toward that because that's what EDA funds best or most. And there's also one of the questions we get most often is, hey, I'm in this state, we're thinking about doing this, who's already done it, and how good did they do it, and what can we steal, or what can we do, as opposed to thinking, all right, what's best for our community? And so that strategy piece I'm a tad concerned about. And then there's the acceptance of particularly climate related science and how well R&D and science are being received, particularly in some state legislatures. So David, did you get much from people in the chat?
No, not a lot of input on that. Yeah.
So Adam, if you want to go ahead. So where is state innovation dollars going? And a lot of this, and it's hard right now to reconcile on our end, and this is one of the things we try to do at SSTI, is track what states are spending to support an innovation economy. With all of the federal dollars, with in all of the different pots of money, and then also state tax receipts have far exceeded what everybody expected. Everyone's running a surplus in addition, not everyone, almost everyone's running a surplus in addition to all of the federal stimulus money they've received. So they are making huge investments across the board. And it's hard to tell exactly what is one-time spending versus activities they will continue. So there's a list here of some of the types of innovation activities that are getting the biggest chunks of money. And on the next slide, we'll show a few examples. But, oh, no, let's go back for a second, Adam, sorry. One of the things I am concerned about, obviously inflation is the topic of the day, or a legitimate concern. A lot of states are providing tax cuts, tax rebates, or stimulus payments to folks coming out of the pandemic with all of this extra money. And there was concern that the federal stimulus investments that were through CARES and ARA to folks during the pandemic fueled inflation. I'm wondering, why won't these extra dollars do the same thing as well? So while we say we want to fight inflation, are we not also creating more of it because of some of this activity that's not investing in the future? It's just returning cash that they have currently. I'll also say there are states that are recognizing this may be a very short-term blip in their revenues, and so they're holding back on their tax restructuring, and that's Democrat and Republican states. And then there are also, well, no, I'll just stop it there. Adam, we can go ahead now. Now, I don't know how small this is on your screens, so if you need to zoom it in or something like that, but these are just a few examples of almost all of them were announced in the last 2 months alone of what states are doing or hoping to do around some of the investment or innovation space. And I've just pulled some examples, tried to do a range of different types of things to show you about, and so you'll see, you know, Idaho, $12 million for cyber response and defense fund. There are very few states that are doing that at this point. There's some talk around cybersecurity and needing to beef up, but that's one of the larger state investments that I've seen in the space. And the other thing to note here is just the size of some of these programs. Some of it is because they'll just be taking off-the-shelf technology to implement, like the Arizona $1 billion for desalinization. That's obviously a huge issue, getting water, and hopefully New Mexico, David can steal some of that once they get it in place. But there are states that have not been terribly active at the state level in innovation that are now stepping up. Alabama is a great example of that, doing things that it's been a very long time since we've seen a state state leadership in the innovation space from Alabama. The universities and corporations helped drive that. And then let's see, actually, David, if there's any there that you want to hear from or talk about. Ohio, $100 million each to Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland to do large innovation districts. So again, a real estate play. They made that commitment prior to all of the Build Back Better and CARES and ARA or ARP money. So it's interesting to see what kind of duplication there might be as a result of that. But
so a couple questions, Mark. So
yeah.
From Paul Zielinski, so is SSTI coordinating between folks that received EDA dollars and people that didn't? And then also mentioned that EDA is looking at a tech hubs program, and so asking for any recommendations on potential direction there.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So EDA, well, one, they haven't made their final selections, right? They did a first cut of the Build Back Better pool and narrowed it to 60. Everyone is waiting to hear who the finalists are, and we've gotten a lot of mixed sense for when that date will actually be, that they announced that. I think it's imminent, but we will see. Their plan is to develop a community of practice, give an additional grant to some entity to help coordinate activities within all 60 of those regions to try to make sure the proposals that they put together can be accomplished either through other federal or foundation or public dollars. And then also to ensure best practices and that they maintain the commitments that states have made or the regions have made for the winning proposals. So as far as everyone outside the 60, I don't believe there's any sort of organized effort to try to assist them. Although I suspect a number of the individual projects could be submitted through the traditional PWEDA money or economic assistance funds in EDA. So if you didn't win, or didn't make this first cut, I'd encourage you to talk to your economic development rep in your state or that serves your state to see if these programs can fit within their other funds that are available, CARES, ARP, or their traditional allotment. And then there was a second part, or did I get both of them?
So the second part of the question was around Tech Hubs program.
Oh, yeah.
EDA.
So there, and this is again, Congress and the confusion and the frustration. There are a couple of, not competing, but there are a couple of proposals to create regional tech hubs. One is within EDA, and it's part of the Competes Act, and USICA is at least how we're pronouncing it. Whether or not, which are bills within the House and the Senate, there's some differences between those. There's not much of an appetite at the funding level from the minority in the Senate. So there's a lot of reconciliation that has to happen, and we will have to see what actually comes out of that, what bill comes out of USICA and competes. I believe, at least what I read in Politico and other places, there's some concern that the Ukraine-Russia activity is likely to confuse or delay some of the stuff that we're talking about, the hubs. And then a second hub activity that is part of both of those bills is within the National Science Foundation, a $200 million tech hub program around addressing specific technologies, much more integrated with the university and research community, solutions to regional issues. And that would be housed within the new directorate that is proposed within the National Science Foundation. And again, the funding level for that new directorate there's quite a range in proposals, and so we're not sure where that's going to come out. But both of those are tied up in those bills.
One last question on this around the funding in Ohio. Do you know where the $500 million pathogen R&D program? Do you know where that's going?
Yes, to Cleveland Clinic up in Cleveland. It's a partnership with them. I believe university hospitals have a chunk of it as well, but it's part of the Cleveland Innovation Corridor, connecting downtown and Case Western and Cleveland Clinic. But most of the money is going to go to Cleveland Clinic, which is, I don't know if this happens. Well, I know this doesn't happen in a lot of states, but Ohio has always, in all of its innovation stuff, been willing to fund private nonprofits and private universities as much as they do the public schools. So, any more on that end?
I think those are all the questions on these ones.
Okay. Then, Adam, I want to talk a little bit about going forward, and as we come out of the pandemic. And this is an opportunity, I think, for the federal labs to partner, to work with, to become involved with, or think strategically with their local partner organizations. So there are 36 governorships up in November. This is, while not a record, it's a huge number that could significantly shift the innovation policy activity within a number of states. So on this map, hopefully it comes up as orange and green and gray on people's screens. It is, the orange states are wide open. So meaning their governors can't run again or have decided not to. Most of those, looking at this, well, Democrat, Republican, 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 Democrat, Republican, Republican. given it's an off-year election, well, no, I won't go there because state governorships and Congress tend not to necessarily parallel each other as far as election results. 46 state legislatures will also be determined in this year. And so the sentiment of the public around all of these issues as we come out of the pandemic and the recession and the war and everything else, that could very much influence, and redistricting could influence innovation policy going forward. So the question becomes, we essentially have collectively, 6-7 months to influence, 5 months to influence the innovation policy agendas of these candidates. And even if it doesn't end up a platform or something, a talking point for them, how do you get them thinking about innovation and your needs, the lab needs in commercialization, workforce, or siting, or any of the issues, so that you become top of mind when they go into office? And a number of them will say, all right, I'm setting up an economic development or a strategic plan, or we're developing new policies, or we're doing this. How do you make sure you're part of that? So without being political or partisan, I should say, there are ways to try to make sure they know about what the labs are doing and the companies you're helping create locally, or what your workforce issues are. And I encourage you to do this in partnership with your chambers of commerce and your economic development organizations and your incubators and universities around innovation summits or discussion days where the candidates come in and talk about how will innovation fit into their administration if they're elected. It will go very quickly, the time, so we have to kind of work on these kind of things now. And this will be one of the topics, our conference coming up May 2nd, 3rd, 4th in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're going to have a couple sessions around how do we do this? How do you make sure that what you're doing is recognized as important to the lab or to the candidates? And that is all I had prepared to say. So if we have more questions or people want to talk about their own experiences, what's going on or problems in their regions, happy to do it, or to let people go.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, folks, feel free to put questions in the chat. Here's a question for you on the conference. So for sure happening in person?
Yes, yeah, so masks are coming off, right? Pandemics, apparently we're all immune to it now or something. But we have decided after 2 years of not doing it, that even if it's a smaller crowd than normal, which we don't believe it will be, we are meeting in person. 1, May is far enough out at this point that we should be fine. But 2, excuse me, I've been distracted because there are people right outside my office, and this is not something that happens. But they're not interested in me. That's okay. All right. We need people talking face to face. Zoom is great. It gets people involved, but we want to actually have conversations around what we need to do going forward. And the theme, like I said, is focusing on the future. So with all of this new money from the feds, with the new administrations, with issues like climate change and what the IPCC put out yesterday, how do we partner? How do we make it work with China, with supply chain issues, all of it? So we will definitely be in person, and I hope a lot of you join us. Need the lab's input.
One question that just came in, and I'll kind of add to this. So was, are there restrictions on federal employees lobbying state government politicians? I guess so we definitely come up against that a lot, right? And how the labs engage with state economic development, and also I think with SSTI in general. So what are resources, given that there is a limited there are limitations, right, and regulations on how we engage with elected officials.
Yeah, and I presume each lab or federal agency has its own rules and limits about how you talk to, or you have to go through certain communication channels when you're talking with somebody. And that's where I think if you're partnering with other folks and it's their event and you're a part of it, or you're just helping make it happen because it's an innovation summit and they've invited those people to be there, but you want to make sure the right folks are there or that they're talking about issues that are important to the lab. There are a lot of ways to do federal education and to make your elected officials aware of your issues without lobbying, right? So this might be an activity FLC and SSTI can do together around how you do message without lobbying, because there are strict rules around it. Jason Rittenberg and we have a lobbyist, I guess we should call them, a lobbying firm that we work with in partnership with a pool of funds separate from all of our nonprofit activity. We're asked to endorse certain bills. I don't think you guys should do that. But I think you can say these issues are important, or why certain things are important, or what might be the effect to you if antitrust legislation passes and how it would affect commercialization. I think you can do it without specifically saying, I want this candidate or I want that bill. So, and we need the labs to do it because you guys know the technology and you know the issues around commercialization and how people will be affected.
Absolutely. All right, Mark. I think we are.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and
right on.
Paul. Yeah, this is perfect. Paul, thanks for putting those resources in there. Mark, thanks for joining us for the lightning talk. This is really great, and yeah, looking forward to Little Rock and talking to you all more.
Yep. Look, I hope I do get to see you, Dave, and everybody else. And otherwise, I'm going to have to come to Albuquerque, and I'm not opposed to doing that.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming.